It was the first time I realized approaching me could be a daunting task for some people. Sister Dialogus Wellmanamia looked apprehensive and nervous as she approached me to verify if my name was written correctly for her record. Wellmana herself looked more similar to the older metal model which represented a Sister Dialogus than the newer plastic version. Sans the ridiculous scrolls hanging around her body plus missing a staff, her general hairstyle and the eyepiece she wore matched the metal model. After I verified my name, i.e. SYRINE, was spelt correctly, this still felt weird every time as I can talk and read Low Gothic like I have known them for life. Wellmana's next question boggled my mind on an obvious but little discussed matter. I am sorry, my lady. But your name is simply just that? Do you have a surname for me to complete my record? The scholar timidly asked. My thought acceleration activated upon hearing her question. Yeah, why doesn't SYRINE have a surname? Almost everyone important enough seems to have longer names, right? Like I had learned the name of the current planetary governor was Catalina von Cleus from the Fortress database, and she was quite good looking. But wait. Suddenly, to my shock, it occurred to me amongst the Primarchs, a lot of them like Magnus, Angron, Sanguinius, Fulgrim and Alpharius seem to have always had a single name. Even Perturabo, who was disclosed in the lore to have known his own name since birth, had ever only gone around with a single name. I vividly recalled an audio drama featuring the Primarch going, I am Perturabo, when his birth pod landed near a mountain and he was surviving as an angry baby for a while. So I looked at Wellmana and replied sincerely, yes, I have but a single name. Do we still have some time before the canoness arrives? Can anyone tell me about the prophecy Alisaya mentioned? My easygoing attitude seemed to have eased the sisters a bit, so we sat down before Wellmana started telling me the stories and legends from the founding of the minor militant order of the Shining Beacon. It was a story that happened about 1,000 years ago. An unnamed sister returned triumphant from an impossible mission with a mysterious sword. She later received visions from dubious sources telling her to travel here and establish the Shining Beacon Order. Officially that was where the story ended. Unofficially, said sister had received more visions foretelling a prophecy about the coming of a true daughter of the Emperor who would be their salvation in their darkest hour. It was known as the Holy Daughter Prophecy. My troubled senses were tingling just from hearing the vague details passed down as legends. The story contained a shining figure with no more description who could cut through the throng of enemies like paper mock-ups with a sword. Then the poor sister started receiving vague visions asking her to leave her home and the people she knew behind, bravely travel a large swath of the hostile galaxy to establish a new branch of Sororitas Order in a backwater part of the Imperium, only to wait for a certain someone to save the day when cosmic shit hits the galactic fan. Be their salvation in the darkest hour? I doubt anyone but the Emperor himself is capable of such a feat. In the lore I knew even after Obute Gulaman returned it wasn't exactly sunshine and roses awaiting the renowned Primarch, and he was the real deal. This story had all the hallmarks of some powerful entities laying down a groundwork for their schemes and letting the lesser people toil till they dropped written all over it. I was contemplating the story when the corner of my mind registered multiple incoming aircraft through my link with the Fortress Machine Spirit. It was the same Aquila lander Alisaya was riding in earlier, and it now had 4 fighter escorts. Alisaya, will your canoness be arriving in the same lander you rode? Probably. Why? I think she is here. We ended up receiving the canoness with 2 other sisters in another meeting room with spotless reflective walls. This room was much grander than the room I had used earlier, probably in a show of respect to the Order's highest-ranking member visiting. Present with me was Alisaya and Wellmana, then Verita joined in representing the Inquisition instead of Neandra due to their request to keep certain sensitive matters within the Adepta. We all stood up as the 3 new visitors stepped through the door with the canoness leading in the front, the floor clicking with the steps of their power armor boots. You could feel the air of piousness they carried as they entered the room. The canoness looked to be in her 40s and had surprisingly delicate features considering her position. She looked impressive in her personalized ornate power armor, which was half covered with an elaborately embroidered cloak featuring a hood. A huge symbol of the Ministorum was shining proudly below her collar. The 2 sisters who arrived with her were obviously elite warriors of the Order. One of them was carrying a long object covered by a silk cloth with purity seals plastered all over it. While they looked decent enough, they exuded so much martial prowess in their demeanor I suspected even drunken hooligans would not dare to approach them. One of them even had a small fleur-de-lis tattooed under her left eye. Alisaya, Wellmanna and Verita all bowed deeply while simultaneously performing the Aquila hand sign towards the canoness. At a loss of what to do for my proper etiquette but suspecting I should not follow the sisters, I merely performed the Aquila hand sign. The canoness pulled back her hood, returned the gesture and stood perfectly still looking at me. After a while, just before it started giving me the creeps, she finally spoke. "Greetings, I am Canoness Diadina. You must be Lady SYRINE. I heard you had entered the inner sanctum." "Inner sanctum? You meant the place where I met Sister Alicia?" I inquired while glancing at the Palatine, and the latter was fast on returning an affirmative expression. Canoness Diadina nodded and continued, "Your arrival was foretold by our founder. It was unfortunate this happened at the worst possible time and resulted in your amnesia. I apologize if my actions appeared hasty, but our situation is getting dire and time is scarce." She then gestured to the sister who was carrying a long object, and the sister stepped forward, carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a huge sheathed sword that looked too big to be wielded with one hand for an average human. The sister respectfully presented the hilt end of the sword towards Diadina. The canoness muttered a quick prayer before pulling out the sword in one go with both hands. A blinding flash filled the room as the mirror-finished blade exited its sheath. "Behold, the nameless sword," Diadina said. I heard Alicia gulp at the sight of their order's holiest relic, and all eyes in the room were looking at the shimmering blade. The canoness admired the sword reverently while explaining to me, "Though impressive, this relic is only a really sharp piece of almost indestructible metal forged with incredible skill. The reality was, any decent power sword will outperform it, so it was rarely used on the battlefield." However, she looked at me and continued, "There were records of it behaving like a power sword and more in the heat of battle during dire circumstances, which should have been impossible due to the sword having no power circuit nor power source." Diadina paused for a while before turning to her colleague, "Sister Wellmanna, have you briefed Lady SYRINE about our founding legends yet?" "Yes, my canoness," the Dialogus sister quickly replied. "Good," Diadina said, and approached me with the huge sword. "There is one more legend that was only passed down from each successive canoness. Until now." She stopped in front of me and presented the hilt of the sword towards my side. "It was said the true and holy daughter of the Emperor will appear in our darkest hour to lead us, and the nameless sword shall be her witness." Wait, what? While I might be this prophesied figure they spoke of, I was definitely no warrior, let alone wielding a sword. What am I supposed to do? "Just hold the sword," Diadina nudged. Looking at the large blade, I hesitated and wanted to decline. "I am no warrior, canoness." "Please, my lady, a final verification if you will. This is the secret directive my order passed down since our founding." Everyone was looking at me expectantly. I gulped, touched the hilt of the sword and picked it up. It was surprisingly lighter than it looked. I ran Analytica on it and it simply read Nameless Sword. Its size was on the larger end, probably due to it being built as a single-handed weapon for a Space Marine-size end-user in mind. In my hands, it sort of resembled the size of a slightly larger bastard sword. I raised the sword with both hands, had its blade stood upright pointing at the ceiling, and was enlightened to the fact that this was a perfectly balanced blade, a truly remarkable piece of work. Intrigued by the level of craftsmanship invested into a piece of metal that was meant for killing, I turned it slowly while watching the light reflect on its mirror finish. It was then out of the blue that a weird sensation hit me. I had a distinct feeling someone or something was reaching out to me, and my thought acceleration activated in case this was an attack. Just as the world slowed down, a flat and artificial-sounding message wormed itself into my consciousness. You passed the preliminary scan. For the next level of activation, insert your blood into the sword fuller. Wait, who was communicating with me? I looked around and eventually, my eyes settled on the sword. This sword is imbued with artificial intelligence? The need for blood or any other bodily fluid to activate a gene lock was not a new thing in this universe. I recalled a scene in the lore where an infamous Primar clicked on a data slate to bypass a high-security measure. I looked at the sword again and decided to do as it advised, but I was too big a pansy to cut my finger with its edge. Sister Verita. I held out my hand to her. "If you please, kindly prick my finger so I might get a few drops of blood." She was surprised but quickly went to work with haste. A few seconds later and it was done. It was wise to leave it to the professionals. All the sisters watched with bated breath as I gingerly dropped my blood into the sword's fuller. ++. Nothing happened. Did I make a fool of myself? Then a loud chime sounded from the sword, startling everyone in the room, and more messages started reaching my mind. Genie code accepted. Next level activation started. As the sword came alive, alarmingly I felt it started drawing heat and energy from me. Just as I was about to panic and drop it, the sword passed the energy back to me and an energy loop of sorts formed. Faster and faster the energy circulated until I felt like the weapon had become an extension of my limbs. An energy field suddenly flickered to life around the blade of the sword, showering the meeting room with pure blue light while the sisters gasped. "This is the azurus glow," Wellmanna whispered with her shaking voice. "Last recorded sighting was over 2 centuries ago." While this looked pretty, I was unsure of its stability and decided to test it. Like a noob, I did some mock swings with the weapon and stopped when remembering I really was no warrior with zero training in swordsmanship. My sword swing probably looked so amateurish I wonder if it made the battle sisters cringe. The good news was the energy field persisted and was not going anywhere. "So, it is just a fancy power sword?" I queried while marveling at the glowing sword. "My lady, it is running without a power source," Diadana replied with unconcealed excitement. Maybe that sounded like a miracle on the surface, but I reckoned it should be just some fancy mechanic like the luxury Rolex watches running solely on kinetic energy but scaled up with space-age technology mixed with a bit of thrown-knows-what sorcery. Personally, I was not that impressed due to the simple fact that using this weapon still implied one had to walk up to people and chop them up within arm's reach. I looked again at the shimmering blue light on the mirror blade and had to admit, impractical as it was going melee into a battlefield brimming with guns, the sword with its energy field it activated was enchantingly beautiful. Then an idea hit me: what if I introduced my psychic energy to the circulation? Though I loathed the idea of activating Psychana Activa, as I still had so much to learn about the perils of the warp, my curiosity got the better of me. Just a little while should be fine, I thought, and went psychic active. Psychana Activa, activated. The world went trippy as expected, but this time I was ready for it. Psychic energy reacted to my active state and swirled around and inside me, then onto the sword, adding another layer of energy into the circulation. Then it happened, starting with a hint of fluctuation in the energy field. A second later a brilliant fire burst forth into existence and the whole blade was covered in a dazzling blue flame. Astonished by this sudden development, I almost dropped the sword again but immediately noticed no heat coming from the conflagration. "This is psychic flame?" I moved my fingers near the raging spectral inferno and confirmed no rise in temperature. How peculiar. Mesmerized by the pretty light show, my whole attention was transfixed on it for a while until I remembered there were still other people in the room. Now that I think about it, they were awfully quiet. Flustered by my ability to get lost in my little world, which would undoubtedly look like a lack of proper manners, I turned my attention back to them and was surprised to see all the sisters, including the canoness, knelt before me. Speaking in a voice shaking with religious fervor, Diadana proclaimed with the tone of finality, "Revered Lady SYRINE, I, Diadana Grace, canoness of the Order of the Shining Beacon, hereby officially recognize you as the prophesied holy daughter of the Emperor. Please take over the command of the Order and lead us as you will." Wait, activating a flaming sword doesn't prove any. I wanted to say but caught a sight that made me froze. There on the many spotless mirror-like surfaces inside the meeting room were the reflections of a fair maiden standing tall, holding a huge sword crackling with raging azurus flame, and around her head was the unmistakable holy radiance of a golden halo. My heart almost stopped as I got a better look at my own reflection. The familiar yet so very distant girl was staring back, eyes gleaming brightly with a golden glow. Coupled with an unknown source of illumination that seemed to originate from around her head, she exuded a magnificent level of saintly presence that compelled subservience. There was a sort of religious piousness resonating in the air. I could even feel the level of faith the sisters were emanating in their willingness to serve. Through the acknowledgement of the canoness and my legitimacy established by the legends from the Order's founder, in a way I have my very own army now. Without prompting, my mind was already running some cold calculations. It was understood if I played the card of being the Emperor's daughter well, with but a word of command the whole Order would mobilize against the rebels head-on despite the odds. The sororitas' very own zealotry and subscription to the Emperor's divinity would see them grinding forward regardless of casualties. We could probably do it too, with help from Cryptora on electronics warfare and intelligence. Together with the support of the governor's forces, we could strike into the heart of the rebels and decapitate its leadership, ending this threat now and be prepared for the real incoming crises. The whole sororitas order could get into position before the enemies even knew what hit them, with a total shutdown of their communication network. To increase the odds of success, I would need to be leading in the front with this ridiculous flaming sword in hand and ceaselessly using my authority to turn the rebels' mightiest weapons on themselves, all the while spamming thought acceleration to always be on top of every tactical situation. If we were lucky enough, we might even be able to get close enough for me to cut down the enemy leaders with this sword. Rendered leaderless and in the chaos of the battlefield, the bulk of the rebel forces would be easily destroyed by our coordinated front. Hundreds of thousands of rebels would be grounded to dust. Valor and glory await. There will be casualties, hopefully on an acceptable level. Too bad we did not have access to Astartes unit to lead as the spear tip. Wait, what am I doing? If only I could know what would happen if that idea was put into action. Then I noticed a new line appearing in my vision. Run simulatio? Yes/no. Simulatio? That's new, but this unknown service had yet to fail me. I chose yes without hesitation. Simulatio activated. There was a flash. Suddenly I was transported into a battlefield where dust was omnipresent and explosions were constantly thundering in the background. Dead bodies littered everywhere and endless streams of tracers lit up the sky. My superhuman mind was registering over 100 immediate threats and over 1,000 background information were fighting for my attention. The enemy's communication network was down, but having nowhere to go, most of them had resolved to fight to the death. Every street and alley was jam-packed with entrenched soldiers. Despite constant airstrikes and artillery bombardments, they did not yield. Again, they had nowhere to go and this place might probably be their home. Faint cries of children could even be heard between earth-shattering explosions. Nearby, the bulk of enemy elite troops had barricaded themselves, resulting in brutal close-quarters fighting that could only be described as a colossal meat grinder. Squads and squads of sisters under the cover fire of constant bolter barrage got close to their quarry, their power armor deflecting hails of small arms fire raining down on them. Once they got close enough, they let loose of their flamers and melters to burn a way through, their grisly progress marked by the smell of burnt flesh filling the air under a sky darkened with misery. Under my direct command, the sisters would not falter, but the enemies would not yield. This war was started on the basis of labeling the rebels as heretics. Being condemned as such, they knew their only way out was to fight to their death. This was a bloody mess and a literal hell on earth. Any non-veteran of such large-scale warfare will probably not make it through. Just as that thought flashed through my mind, I caught sight of several fallen sisters in a huge crater not far from me. Compelled by an unspeakable ominous feeling, I approached the crater with trepidation and took a closer look. There amongst the fallen was a familiar face, the first person I met in this world. Palatine Alicia Sabatith lay dead in the crater. She was a literal bloody mess, but even under that pile of brain matter, there was still enough of her face to identify her. Being caught in between zeal and inexperience, or even just plain bad luck, had probably taken her life. Looking at Alicia's corpse amidst a background of constant muffled explosions, I felt my soul leaving my body. But wait. Didn't she just kneel down happily before me mere moments ago? My eyes snapped open and I was back in the meeting room. A quick check on the chronometer told me it was just a few seconds after I saw my own reflections. Gasping for air despite not feeling out of breath, I quickly turned off Psychana Activa, while ignoring a few, regardless, messages that had popped up in my vision. As I got back into the sweet embrace of normalcy, in the reflections my halo and the raging blue flames on my sword started slowly fading away. My mind was still racing from what I saw, but the sight of Alicia well and alive had calmed my shaken nerves. Was that a simulation mixed with a bit of prescience? I looked around, found no answer and could no longer just keep the sisters waiting, but that brief vision of the hellish battlefield had shown me how lacking I was in real war experience and leadership capacity. If I were to lead now, it will only end up in a real disaster. I calmed myself further and approached the kneeling canoness. That is something I will not do at the moment. Sisters, please rise. I decided. Diadina looked up but did not stand. "Lady SYRINE, please accept the command of the order," she pleaded with me again. "While I might be the person your prophecies spoke of," I admitted, "please understand I am sorely lacking in experience and am suffering from partial memory loss. Pushing me to lead the order now is just asking for the ruination of the Emperor's domain. I will definitely act with his best interest in mind. So please, stand up so we may work on how to proceed forward. As you have said, we need to make haste to save this world. Rise, sisters, we have much to discuss." With that, the canoness reluctantly stood up, followed by the rest of the sisters. I handed back the nameless sword to the canoness, symbolically passing the leadership role for the order back to her. She seemed to understand this and received the sword reverently, but could not hide her disappointment completely as she watched the blue light slowly disappearing on the blade. "Now, before we speak further, there is an important thing I have to verify with you all. The accursed 13th Black Crusade is in full swing, is it not?" I asked. Diadina nodded grimly at my question. "What was the last major news you received before communication was cut off from the rest of the Imperium?" Diadina thought for a while before replying, "Nothing much. Last we heard there was some really heavy engagement happening around Cadia. We were bracing for any eventual spillovers before getting caught off guard by the local uprising." That was it. I had confirmed that the news of the fortress world of Cadia falling never reached here. Naturally, I had tried looking it up on the fortress database with no results, but I had to be sure. How would they take the news? Listen well, sisters, you might wish to not believe what I am about to tell you. But let the Emperor be my witness, what I am going to say is the truth. I said while I started digging into my memory of the lore on how Cadia was destroyed. I had the thick cover campaign book in my collection back in my geek life after all. Knowing the extremely heavy nature of the story, I had the sisters seated before telling them about how at the climax of the Black Crusade, Abaddon the Chaos Warmaster had dragged and dropped a blackstone fortress onto Cadia, breaking the planet apart, how Cadia was housing the mysterious Necron pylons that had been controlling the Eye of Terror, how this resulted in the great rift known as Cicatrix Maledictum being unleashed onto the Imperium, breaking it into two, and it probably was the reason why the light of the Emperor had stopped reaching us. The sisters were still while listening, but their faces grew visibly more serious as the story progressed. Foreseeing all this, I had used the calmest tone possible when telling the story, as I was quite sure if this information were to be told by any other person it would instantly be labeled as heresy. The only other sound other than my voice in the room was by Wellman's autoquill as she diligently scribbled down stuff onto her data slate in a valiant effort to record down what I had said. Not sure why she bothered unless voice recording was prohibited due to security reasons. After I finished talking, Diadina asked the obvious question. "Pardon me, but I had to ask, where did you get all that first-hand information?" If I were to tell her the truth that I read about it from a gaming campaign book and saw the Black Stone Fortress dropped on Cadia in a cutscene of a video game, even the canoness with all her mental fortitude might have gone insane. So I conjured as much sincerity as possible and told them with a straight face, I got them from the highest source possible before arriving here. Whether it was by design or fate, for reasons I myself could not fathom, that part of my memory is intact. Which was technically true. There were no higher sources than the publisher themselves, unless they retcon it later, but that would not be my fault. The room was dead silent after I finished briefing the sisters on the fall of Cadia. They could use some time to absorb the shock, so I waited. The sister who had a small fleur-de-lis tattooed under her left eye was the first to break the silence. "So, how do we move forward, and what is the Emperor's plan for us?" Happy that someone had asked the critical question to move forward, I turned to the sister, which prompted her to quickly bow and introduce herself. "I am Celestian Superior Marquila Merit, honored to make your acquaintance, Lady SYRINE." Marquila was a fierce but fine-looking lady with short-length copper blonde hair just reaching the bottom of her neck. The right side of her ear was covered with a sophisticated-looking Vox device. While all the members of the sororitas I have met so far seemed very capable, from my hunch Sister Marquila tops the list of being the most dangerous of them all. She would easily be a champion of the order if such a position exists. Looking at her serious face, I felt a tad bit uncomfortable for such a lady showing me this degree of reverence. If my predictions are correct, little to no reinforcements will be coming. I had worked with the last astropath on this planet the whole of yesterday night, and we only ever managed to make contact with the Imperial worlds within the subsector. There was little response, so I continued, Our main goal for the moment should be ending this uprising as soon as possible with minimal casualties. As for the Emperor's will, the very mention of the Emperor had all the sisters perked up, but I had nothing to offer. My mind drew blank, but looking at the sisters I knew some directive was needed for them to chew on, no matter how vague it was. Then I recalled an opening cutscene from a certain grimdark video game. After a brief moment of thought acceleration to organize the script, I looked them in their eyes and recited the opening scene dialogue with some modifications. Sisters, the Imperium has always been besieged by aliens and monsters, attacked from within by heretics and rebels. For 10,000 years it has endured. Because of the faithful like you all. By his will and with me by your side, we shall stand against the coming darkness and see to it the light of humanity is not lost in this part of the galaxy.